Really glad to be with all of you tonight. I'm excited to share with you what I have been focused on recently. As Jenny mentioned, I've been doing this change work for a number of years. Started my background career actually in instructional design, and over the years have graduated into much more strategic change. I cut my roots on, traditional organizational development work, but just so you know, the last name is kind of weird. Everybody mispronounces it, but if you think of Twiggy, not that I look like her, but that's how my last name is pronounced, is Steege. So it's a hard G, and it's kind of funny. We had a family reunion years ago, and everybody in my family pronounces it differently. So it's just how we were raised to pronounce it. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. So as I mentioned, my name is Tricia Steege, and my firm's name is Transformation Strategies, and we are an executive coaching and change leadership consulting firm. We specialize in an area called neuro-informed change leadership development. And that's a lot of what I want to talk with you about today. But before we get started, I want to clarify something through this discussion. Let me move. I think that might be blocking a little bit. I'm going to be referring a lot to change leaders throughout this conversation, because change leaders are the primary client with whom my firm works. But as change leaders, we put in that bucket anybody that is trying to influence behavior change, either with a colleague or an entire group of stakeholders. Anytime we're doing that, we're leading change. And all of you who are talent development professionals are working to drive behavior change every day. So I put all of you in that bucket of being change leaders. So tonight, as I'm working through this conversation, I'll keep referring to change leaders. Just know I see you as part of that conversation. So the first thing I want you to think about is, how would you define excellent change leadership, and how would you know when somebody's really a mature change leadership or not, a change leader or not? And you may be thinking, well, I think I can tell when somebody's a mature change leader, or you may even be thinking about your own change leadership maturity and how it's growing and changing over time. But that's what we're going to talk about tonight. As far as kind of learning objectives, I'm going to give you a lot of information about the brain and how it really works, influences our behavior during change, how it processes change. And then we're going to spend time talking about hacks that we can use to help lead people through change and help them manage change in a more effective way, so that they can flourish during times of a lot of change. And we're also going to be talking, and many of those hacks, by the way, are things you're probably going to find you already do anyway. But when you have it with the context of that we're doing it by keeping the brain in mind, it kind of helps marry the purposes of it. So why is this idea of mature change leadership so critical? Well, it has mostly to do with this VUCA world that we're in. Many of you have probably heard this term before, but if you're not familiar with it, it's a term that is used in the military to describe conditions of warfare. But they certainly apply to us in our business world today and to our organizational life. So the level of volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity that we're dealing with is only increasing over time. And it's putting really much different demands on us in terms of what we need for our leadership to do, particularly those that are leading change. And it's because of these VUCA levels, it's becoming increasingly difficult to directly correlate cause and effect. There used to be a time where you could say, when we do this, we will see this results. That's no longer the case. Change is constant. These complex environments we're in are happening, things are happening so quickly and so simultaneously that we can't directly correlate cause and effect anymore. So our organizational life is full of complexity and change, and organizations really need their people to be able to constantly adapt and collaborate and innovate and perform at their best, even during these times of disruption. And it's really becoming, it's making organizational life really difficult and more difficult to lead through. And when leadership is not happening well, then change is not managed well, because all leaders are responsible for managing change in today's VUCA world. It's no longer about having an outside firm like myself come in and magically make everything happen, make change happen. Certainly we come in and help put strategies together, but we collaborate and really partner close with our clients, because those individuals are the ones who have to sustain it and keep it going. When we quote unquote leave, we really are a believer in teaching people how to fish. Change leadership is a core competency that needs to be adopted into organizations. So, but when change is not managed well, there's all of these costs that occur, and they're obviously high cost, and in particular, the loss of valuable employees. And when we are in change initiatives or constant change like we're in right now, you are at one of the most vulnerable places you can be in an organization. And it's one of the most vulnerable times that an organization can experience. We see decreased engagement. We're in this right now. All of us are looking at these talent wars that we're dealing with, the resignation issues that we're dealing with. There's productivity loss, there's burnout going on. That is opening doors for people to allow competitors to come basically woo our employees away to go work with them. Customer service suffers. It's just all kinds of costs when change is not managed well. And so what I want to ask you to do, and I'm going to ask you to throw this into the chat box, when we know we have so much knowledge out there today about how to implement change, there is a lot of information out there about methodologies and processes about how to manage change, and yet we are still experiencing this really high change failure rate. So given all of that, why do you think that change is not happening well? Throw your ideas into the chat box. Give me some ideas about why you think change is not happening well in organizations today. Just go ahead and put your ideas in. Don't get buy-in. Good. Happening too quickly. Yes. Lack of trust. The why isn't fully conveyed. Absolutely. Any others? Habits are hard to break. Self-awareness not there. These are great. Change is top down. Lack of planning. Good. These are great. Well, all of these things I think are reasons that contribute to why change we are still seeing so much change failure. What we believe at the core is that leaders really lack knowledge. They lack the knowledge of the critical role that they play during change. They lack the knowledge of understanding some of the fundamental change methods and processes, which is our traditional approach to change management, things like stakeholder analysis and communication planning and putting change networks together and creating sponsorship networks and things like that. But even more important, we believe, is that change leaders really lack the knowledge about what happens to the brains of people when they're leading change, how the brain perceives and processes change, and what can be done to enable our brains to work at their best during these times of uncertainty. Because again, when you look at the level of complexity that leaders are having to deal with and what leaders are able to actually bring to that, and you look at all of these reasons why we just said change is not happening well, we believe that it's essentially causing this change leadership development imperative. We're finding that strong change leadership activities are needed, and yet the traditional approach to leading change is insufficient because our traditional approaches really focus on methods and processes. It's not based in neuro-informed change leadership, which I will explain to you shortly. So again, the case I'm building for you here is that the world is increasingly VUCA, and we're seeing that this gap between what leaders need to do to deal with change and their actual ability to do it, that gap is growing, especially the more senior that they get in organizations. And what we're also knowing is that our traditional approaches to change methods, change management and change leadership is insufficient because it's based on implementing methods and processes, step-by-step things, which are not bad, but it's not the base. It's just one of the things. It's not based on neuro-informed change leadership. And so at this point, you're wondering probably what neuro-informed change leadership is about. And we really see it as the antidote for this VUCA environment. So we are using scientific evidence to lead people through change and create these mentally, physically, and emotionally safe workplaces that perform and flourish during complexity because we're using our knowledge about neuroscience. We're also able to use neuroscience to provide a lens that helps us better understand others' perspectives and what motivates them. We're also using neuroscience to help us plan better. We're using it on the micro level. How do we plan for this change? How do we put a change strategy together that considers the neuroscience piece, the people side of things, what's going on with the brain? But neuroscience also allows us to really work individually with people to help them put their plans together so that they can create their own daily plans and operations about how to help them be more effective during these times. And then lastly, we're using neuroscience to help us really better reflect on our own behaviors and look at our own triggers and adjust them in real time. So how does neuro-informed change leadership work? Well, first, there are some real foundational truths that need to be understood. And some of the things, first things a highly effective change leader needs to understand is that managing change is not about implementing a new system or creating a new culture or implementing a new technology or any of that. Those are just the triggering events that require us to manage the change. But really managing change is really about changing behavior. That's what's really at the core. And many leaders really forget this key principle. Now, we can get people to embrace and adopt something well. Getting people to embrace and adopt something is why we really work to manage the change. But at the end of the day, changing behavior is really about creating those situations or environments that really facilitate those individuals to make that personal decision to change their behavior. Because people decide to change when they make it a personal decision. So we can command people and people will comply, but we may not really be getting the hearts and the minds of those individuals and the commitment that we need. And until they make that personal decision to change their behavior, to adopt whatever it is, or follow this certain process, or whatever it is that we're asking them to change, we won't get the full commitment that we need. And the question then becomes, how do we really get people to make that personal decision? Because that's a toughie. So, and typically people won't make a decision to change unless there's so much pain in where they are now that the payoff doesn't outweigh their moving forward. They make a decision to change and move forward in something. Or people will also make changes to their behavior and decisions to change when they really feel that sense of safety and trust, and that someone really has their back. And what we know is that a personal decision to change behavior, an individual's personal decision to change their behavior, is directly related to the strength of that relationship that individual has with their direct change manager. So when people have a strong, trust-filled relationship with their manager, they'll run through walls for that leader. It does not matter what that leader asks them to do. This is the core reason that I believe change is not working as well as it should, because those that are leading change are not really focusing on what they need to do to build trust with those individuals. And again, this is where being neuroinformed really helps, because when we understand the principles of how the brain works during change and what governs it, then it makes it easier for us to understand not only our own behavior, but the things that leaders are doing, if they're leading, what they're doing that are potentially sabotaging that relationship. So in order to excuse me a minute. So in order to take this perspective, we take the perspective that change leadership is no longer about leading a specific change project, but it's about integrating everything that leader does. So when we're working with a client and teaching them about change leadership, we focus on teaching them some of the fundamental change methods and processes, because they're foundational. They're just not the end all be all. We also work with them on developing their leadership skills. So their traditional leadership skills about managing performance or giving performance feedback or decision making or whatever those things are that require them to carry out their daily leadership role. But the biggest part of this model that we use with the holistic change leader is self-awareness. And you'll see that that gear is bigger, because it's really, that's where the trust is built. When we're self-aware, we understand that it's the beginning of emotional intelligence. And when we begin to be very self-aware of our own selves and what's triggering us and what's driving our behavior, then, and what breaks or builds, what builds up trust or breaks it down, then we're really operating and leading in a much more holistic fashion. So in order to understand about understand how the brain works during change, we really need to understand a little bit about the structure of the brain and how it develops. And I would venture many of you on this call understand some of this, but I'm just going to go over some basics really quickly. So when we look at the brain, the first part of the brain in our brain structure that develops is this part of the brain develops between 0 and 13 years old. And it's our survival part of the brain. And this is what is the brain's most basic job, is about surviving and keeping us alive at all costs. It's about protecting us. And it's the oldest part of the brain. And then about around the age 13, the brain actually changes the direction in which it develops and starts developing in the frontal precortex piece. And this is the brain that ultimately, part of the brain that ultimately becomes where our executive functioning happens, where we make our planning and our judging activities. And then the last part of the brain to develop is this midbrain limbic. And further development happens in this space when it's the prefrontal cortex is still developing, but the midbrain happens. And this is where ultimately houses our emotional command center. So this is where all of the meaning making that we are doing about life and about reactions to things and making connections, relationship connections, and all of those things, this is where all of that information sits, in this mid portion of the brain. Now, there's a magic potion that all of us need for our brains to develop in its most optimal way. And that is when all three parts of the brain are actually active and equally interacting with each other. And that magic potion is human interaction. And we are created to be in relationship with each other. Our brains are extremely dependent. They're very social. And all of the things means that all of the things that you have deducted about in your life, how you understand the world to operate, all of the first conclusions you made about these things happened during those earliest years in your life. So something else that is also occurring in the brain as it's developing is it goes through this sort of pruning process where the brain does this little mini assessment and begins to really determine what parts of the brain are really being most utilized, where I need to put most of my energy and attention, and those parts that really are not being required to be able to stay alive. Because remember, the brain's key function, first function, is about protecting us and keeping us alive. And the brain actually starts to conserve energy and devote its energy to focusing on those parts of the brain that are necessary, that are active. And those synaptic connections occur at that point. And when we talk about, you know how we talk about being hardwired, this is literally the proteins, the myelinated proteins that are actually wrapping around these connections in our brain and becoming hardwired. So when we talk about, you know, it's hardwired into my biology, it mostly has to do with what was occurring for you during these early development years, when your brain was developing. Obviously, we all have personalities and ways that we think and all of that, but a lot of this is influenced by what was going on for us during those early years. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because it has a lot to do with the ways that we interact today with change, the ways our leaders interact, has a lot to do with what went on for them during their formative years. So let me share some facts with you about the brain. Neuroscience facts, number one, is that our brains really don't like change. And we know this. People talk about people not liking change, but it has more to do with when the brain feels threatened and unsafe. So you know when you're making a change in your life that's really going to yield positive things for you, you really aren't too threatened by change and you make decisions to go towards change. But when you're feeling threatened or unsafe, that's when we start to see people resisting. And it has more to do with what's going on for the brain than it does for the person themselves. So remember, our brains are all about protecting us. And it does this to do two things. It avoids threats and it seeks out rewards. So any significant organizational change or activity where we're being asked to change our behavior is seen by our brains as a threat to our safety. And then the amygdala gets triggered. These fight or flight responses start to occur. Our cortisol hormone levels, which are our stress hormones, those increase. And the interesting thing about cortisol, it really has the ability to use an off switch in the brain. So again, like I said, for those areas where your brain is not perceiving for you to stay alive, the cortisol has an impact on that. And if you're very triggered, or when your brain is really perceiving extreme threat, then this cortisol infusion becomes greater within you physically. And you're kicking into that full survival mode. And I know all of you have experienced, because we're humans, we all know those times where we have not been able to think straight about something, or, you know, we feel like we're going dumb. And usually it's because we are in some kind of fear or threat mode. And the brain is really working very hard physiologically to protect you in that moment. it may not be physically safe, it may not be a physical threat, but it could be an emotional threat, fear of looking bad, or whatever the threat could be. It's automatic, it's in full control. We don't have any control over it. It just happens for us. There are things that we can do to help, bring it back to a functioning place, but there's nothing we can do to just stop the triggers from happening. And we are built to withstand only about 20 to 25 minutes at a time of this full infusion of cortisol, and then the brain starts to adapt and become more capable of operating in a threatening environment, which it's important that it can, because it's there to protect you. So remember, I've said all change is personal. And also, we also know that if people experience change through their own lenses, and that our past experiences have a major impact on how we perceive the present. So imagine if the environment around you during those early years when your brain was developing, if it was an environment where there was constant threat, one's physical safety or emotional safety, if there's abuse going on, if there's alcohol abuse, if there's divorce, any of these kinds of traumatic things that are occurring, it impacts a person's ability to really experience change. It makes huge impacts on how they look at things and perceive things in the rest of their lives. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because this all carries over into our organizations, leaders, employees, everybody. And it will impact how people perceive change. So there's something that's interesting, and we know this to be true from research, and it still is experiencing it today. It still holds true that 70% of the population, so that means 7 out of 10 people in a team, would have been exposed to one of these types of things that I just mentioned, some kind of trauma growing up, and 25% have been exposed to 4 or more of these threats when growing up. So what does this mean for those of us that are trying to influence behavior and influence change? It means that we can expect that the organizations we're working to implement these changes in are filled with leaders and employees that carry these experiences with them into the environment. And that's because the nature of change is introducing threat and uncertainty. They have been patterned and learned how to react to this in threatening environments. And so until they get to a point of recognizing these triggers, becoming more self-aware, they will go into automatic mode. And we start to see behaviors, these threat kind of responses, where we see people lashing out and hurtful behavior and frustration and anger. And that has more to do, again, with how they have learned to react. What we don't see or what we don't hear them articulate as much is all of the stuff that's going on underneath, some of the hurts and shames and all of these kinds of things that are a result of trauma. And so that's why we refer to them as the silent stakeholders. Now, because they will come up and they'll slap you in the face if you're not ready for them. And we do work to help with change strategies when we're putting them together, keeping in mind that these things are there. We're not psychotherapists, we're not there to heal people, but it is important to keep in mind that these things are occurring because of what we know of research and experience set. So the more that we introduce threat and uncertainty, the more leaders and employees are going to be doing to react to protect themselves and are likely to be triggered. I'm giving you a lot of information up front right now. We are going to have conversation and chance to talk about this a little bit, but I did want to give you this information because it will help inform that conversation going forward. So. All right, the second thing about brains, neuroscience fact number 2, is that our brains really don't like change when it can't predict what is going to happen. And a good way for you to kind of understand this is if you try and read this paragraph, you'll notice that it has all kinds of words flipped around and letters and everything. but it's likely that you're able to actually look at that paragraph and read it because of the nature of your brain. You've learned how to predict things. It's learned how to put certain order to things. And that's because of the brain's natural tendency to try and bring predictability. But of course, now we're in this VUCA world. There's nothing predictable right now. I mean, COVID in and of itself introduced tons of uncertainty, and we don't know, when it's going to end. But of course, the brain has become very threatened. People's amygdalas have gotten aroused. There's been lots of anxiety. And what happens during that, in addition to not being able to think clearly, our vision, our views about things can get distorted. We start seeing people getting, assuming things that their colleagues are doing to them that really is not legitimate. It's not a reality, but people's ways of interpreting it are not clear and functioning. Decision making starts to really become difficult. And so but interestingly enough, when the uncertainty is gone, it really allows us to start making meaning of it. So one thing I did want to ask you to do is, as I'm talking about these neuroscience facts, be thinking about the things that we can actually do to help address this. So in this case, what are things that we could do to actually help create some predictability and some certainty for people? Keep those in mind, because we're going to talk about those when we get to the discussion about hacks. So all of this is important about predicting what's going to happen when it can't predict what's going to happen. And there's a lot of things that we can't predict right now. But if people are struggling with change, it's not a sign that they're weak or failing in some way. It's just that their brains don't like change, because their brain's trying to protect them, and it's trying to predict the ending, and it's having trouble making meaning of things, particularly if things are uncertain. So, even people that have a diagnosed terminal illness, actually research has been done. Those people who learn what the real truth is and are given all of the data, they actually find anxiety levels going down for those people, because now those individuals are able to actually, they have all of the information, and they're able to go make plans and do something with it versus having a lot of unknown things. So certainty actually helps remove that psychological discomfort, and having things that are certain for us actually reward our brains. So something to keep in mind. The third thing about our brains that they don't like change is when it takes too much time. Now, during change in and of itself, change processes can sometimes take multiple years to implement. Of course, right now, COVID, we're in this really, nobody knows when this thing is really going to end. It's taking a lot of time. It's taking a lot of toll. And what our brains are trying to do right now is look for ways to really conserve that energy and find ways to take shortcuts for things. So this can be helpful for us, or it can really have a negative impact when this is occurring. It can be good in the sense that it removes the need for us to think through every decision. So there's many decisions you're doing subconsciously or unconsciously that you make every day, because the brain has had some kind of predictability that it's able to assume on. But also, decision making can be really challenging during change, because often there's so much uncertainty about it, which then brings a threat, which then causes bad decisions, and a bad decision can make a change initiative go off the rails. So think about what's happening right now in organizations, particularly as we come out of this pandemic state. Some of the decrees that organizations are making about return to work, even if you think probably a few months ago when we were really just starting to come out of it, these decrees that were happening from organizations about everybody returning to work full time, in the office, and the pushback that started happening there. And some of that had to do with, those organizations were wanting to bring some certainty and quote unquote normalcy back into it. And they had already lived in this time of so much uncertainty. So they were trying to bring some closure to it. But what we're seeing is by making some of those decisions and decrees, there's been a lot of fallout for that. People leaving their organization. We're now dealing with this great resignation issue. And now some organizations are really starting to revisit that. But the initial thing was probably oriented towards them wanting to bring some normalcy and clarity and some kind of certainty back to it. So again, knowing all this, what can we do as talent development professionals to really help counteract these really unproductive, distracting states? What can we do to help really minimize that fear and minimize the sense of threat? Because after all we have right now are the people in our organizations to be able to think and perform effectively. And the brain power of employees is really our most powerful tool today. So that's what we do a lot of in our work, is helping put strategies in place and actions that we can do to help minimize all of these things. So before we go into our breakouts, I want to give you one more piece of information about the brain, and then we will, I'll leave some time for any kind of questions or clarifications before we go into the breakouts. But I know we have a lot of experienced people here in this session today. So I think there's probably things that all of you can think about we can do. So the last thing I want to share with you about is the last piece of brain information has to do with performance. And I want to show you this inverted U of performance, which was put together by a couple of psychologists back in 1908. It has to do with the relationship between the brain and performance. And this is any kind of performance you have, whether it's personal or something on the job. And the law states that performance increases with physiological or mental arousal, but only up to a point. So the point is that our brains do need some kind of stimulation, stress, in order to perform. But when they become too high, performance decreases. So on the Y side of the axis, it shows the ability of the brain to stay focused. So at the bottom here, you have really disorganized and a lot of distraction, whereas the top, you have very focused and very organized. That's the performance and focus. All of this is the prefrontal cortex activity on the Y-axis. And along the X-axis, along the bottom, this is the level of stress the brain is under. Thanks, Terry. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
And on the left, excuse me, the X-axis is that level of arousal. So when we're on the left-hand side, I'm sorry, I kind of lost at the top of the U is where the brain is sharp and really performing well. So this is kind of the maximum place. On the left-hand side of the U, the brain is unfocused, all of this over here. And on the right-hand side, the brain is not performing well either. And like I said, there's this optimal place. Too much or too little arousal reduces our ability to really perform the task well. And again, you've all experienced it. I know you've all had days where you feel like you're in the flow, like things are coming out of you. You don't know where it's coming from. You're getting a ton of work done. You're having to do it. It feels very effortless. And then you go to bed, you come back the next day, and everything is a major hassle. You can't get motivated to do what you need to do. Well, those days that you're in the flow, you're really optimized, you're at this optimal level. And then on those days where there's lack of motivation, it could be either you don't have enough arousal or you have too much. And those of us over here on the too much, you know, we're seeing a lot of it right now with burnout and workload issues and everything else. So when we're in the zone, again, we feel we are rewarded. So what happens when we're in this optimal place of performance? Dopamine is released within us. And dopamine is our reward hormone. So as we feel more rewarded, more dopamine is increased. And dopamine is a chemical in our brain that is that we believe is linked to parts of the brain that really help us acquire new behaviors. It's associated with rewards. So if we're getting rewarded, our dopamine levels will help us acquire new behaviors. And we've said that change management is change good leadership is about getting people to make those personal decisions to change their behaviors. So you can see the connection here. It's important to remember as change leaders that we want to create opportunities where people can be at that optimal performance level, not on either side of the U. So in this case, it means maybe giving people a task, a small task that really engages them, that they're energized about, capturing their attention, knowing they have the skills to meet the challenge, they can get immediate feedback on it, they're doing well, they're getting a positive feeling from what they're doing. This is a key hack, if you will, in helping people stay motivated, engaged during times of a lot of disruption and change. So neuroscience fact number 4 is that our brain really needs stimulation to bring us to that optimal point, but it doesn't like it when it gets pushed too hard. So I'm going to stop talking at this point and see, before we go into individual conversations, breakouts, about what questions, because I know I've given you a lot of information, what thoughts, questions, or comments might any of you have at this point?
Well, I guess this is Jenny, just thinking about how, and I'm sure we'll be going to this, how it really can be practically done from the management down. Yeah.
Right. What are the things we can practically do? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we are going to talk about some practical hacks. Other thoughts or comments? Was there new information for people here tonight?
Hi, my name's Tracy, and yeah, I really liked the the threat responses, the silent stakeholders. I really like that a lot. Yeah, I thought that was great. And sorry, my brain might be being pushed too far over the last couple of days, so I'm having a hard time. But no, I really, this was, yeah, really great sort of, you know, reiteration to just people are always their whole selves, and I really like the VUCA analogy as well. I had never heard that before, but
Okay.
that is something that, you know, when we've been looking at change transformations, just talking about how much uncertainty there is in the world, and employing a change management strategy can help mitigate that and manage it for the workers. Just to, I mean, I'm sure we all get like just uncertainty fatigue, and like even decision fatigue, you know, so so this is great just to have a another acronym to speak to it,
Yes.
because yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of uncertainty. So
Really is. The thing that I like about understanding the neuroscience piece of it, about what's going on for the brain, it really helps divorce the emotions out of it. Because, you know, a lot of leaders that I work with will say, well, they're just resisting. They just don't want, and I have to really coach them about reframing their thinking, because it's not that people intentionally resist. I mean, there's a few people that it doesn't matter what the issue is in the world, you know, they want to rebel or speak the opposite, but most people don't set out to resist things. And they need to have some of the stories and things that people talked about, but really it's their brain that is reacting, and it really helps kind of disassociate and take the emotion out of it. So other comments and thoughts before we go into some smaller group discussions? Thank you, Tracy, for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what I would like to do at this point is have you go into breakouts and talk about these questions. So I'm going to ask you to take a screenshot of this if you need to help you have the discussion. But as you were listening to things, you know, what were some of your ideas about what we can do to really help organizations feel safer, make it feel safer for people? And what can we do to help increase that sense of predictability? And what can we do to help sustain those commitment levels during these long periods of uncertainty, as well as continue to make sure that those levels of performance are occurring? So I'm going to, let's see, we're at 6:52. Yeah, I think we've got some time. I'm going to give you about 8 minutes. I'm going to put you into breakouts. We have 7 people. So I think probably 2 breakout rooms, maybe 3. I'll do 3 rooms. So that'll give you kind of a partner to talk about with this. And just talk about what are some of the things that you think we can do. And then when we come back together, I want to hear about what are some of the things that you came up with. And also, I'm going to give you a whole lot more of things for you to be able to take away. I think they're going to be immediately applicable for you to be able to do. So are there any questions around this? I'll give you a 1-minute warning so that you know we're about to close down, but are there any questions about this? Okay, let me go ahead and put you into breakout rooms at this point. Again, I'm going to make about 3. Jenny and Vanessa, I'm assuming you want to be in these breakout rooms too. So, all right. I'm going to open the rooms. Sandy, I got to put you in somebody else. Let me move you to, one of you is going to have 3 people in it. So, all right. Have a good few minutes, and I'll send you a close down message. So. Hi, Kalpana. Are you there? Hi, Kalpana.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, it's Tricia. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you, Tricia. I couldn't
Good.
get on the link earlier, that the one that I
Oh
had.
yeah, there apparently was a bad link. Listen,
Oh.
we've just gone into breakout rooms. I spent a lot of time giving some background information.
Right. Okay.
How about I put you into one of the breakout rooms? They can kind of catch you up.
Yeah, sure. Thank
Okay.
you. Yes.
All
yes.
right.
Thanks.
Sign to room 2, room 1. Oh. It's not letting me move you. Come on. Here we go. Vanessa, you're still in the room with me? You still there, Vanessa? Right, so let's see. I'm going to give them to about 7:05. Oh, step away for your kids. Okay. Did you want to go into a breakout room, or are you just needing to work with them, the kids? It's not changed. See, I guess I don't think that way. Good Lord. Vanessa, are you back? Okay, people are coming back.
Thank you.
Oh,
That's me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
that's okay. Good. Well, so I know room one, Shani and Tracy, you had a latecomer come. I hope you were able to bring her up to speed. So what were some of the things that you came up with? And let's just start with you guys, Shani and Kapana and Tracy. What were some of the hacks that you thought of and discussed?
Hear me, Tricia?
Yes.
Oh, you can.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Hey,
Okay,
Shani.
yeah, because in the breakout room they couldn't hear me. So
Oh,
okay,
is that
that's
right?
good. Yeah, so I had to type in everything.
Oh, what a drag.
Yeah, it was all right. I typed quickly. The suggestion that I had was that in order to have employees feel safer and increase the sense of predictability, that it is crucial that you have to ask the employees how they think the company should change, and that it shouldn't be top down, because if they're allowed to use their expertise and to plan the change, then they know that they're valued and they know what's going to happen next, and then they'll be more likely to participate. But if you have somebody come in top down that, you know, who ignores all of the expertise and experience of the people who've already been there, then the change is not going to happen at all, because people will just feel, you know, I mean, if you have a bunch of experts, like if you have a bunch of engineers, and then you want to change the company without asking the engineers what should happen, then they'll just completely lose faith in you, and
Right.
they'll never make the change.
And they'll feel out of control of their own, and that leads to feeling threatened and all those things. Absolutely agree. A lot of the work that we do, we do what we have a whole scale event. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that, but we bring all of the major players, the system into the room. So it can be 500 people, it can be 12 people, just all the key people that need to be there, so that the whole system is making a decision about how to approach a change. So absolutely. Good. What other ideas did you all talk about?
So we also talked about the making it safer, maybe, where we said if we were able to alleviate the fears that come with the change, which is the fear of the unknown and the fear of consequences. If I'm unable to adapt, will I be, penalized or whatever? If management was able to partner with their teams with the close-knit communication, have transparency, express the understanding of the impacts that it has to the people involved, so they feel like we're all in it together, and we will have the support of our management and leadership.
Yeah. Good communications. Just to build on that, I was working with a client once who was going through a major reorganization, redesign, and there was going to be pieces of the business that were going to be closed down and pieces of the business that were going to be enhanced, new pieces of the business. But what amazed me is the CEO came in, he had a big town hall and was very clear around there's things that are going to be happening. There'll be uncomfortable things. There'll be positive things. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. Just was very clear, honest, and direct. And while not all of it was good news, the kinds of comments that I heard from people walking by me on the way out I was pretty amazed. The energy level was very high, and people were saying, well, finally we know, somebody's willing to tell us the truth. Now I know what's really going on. I can go do things with it. So it was addressing that, making that uncertainty more certain, even though it had bad news in it. It makes people feel like they have more control. So it's addressing that part of the brain that needs certainty. Yep, absolutely. Any other ideas that came out of the conversation there? From group one? okay? You can always chime in. No, just because we're moving on to group 2 doesn't mean you can't. So group 2, what were some of the conversations you had?
Who's 2?
Oh, sorry. No wonder you're not. Sandy, Jenny, and PR.
Patty. Yeah, I'm
Patty.
2.
Okay. Good. So what did you guys discuss? Sandy or Jenny or Patty, do you want to tell us what you talked about?
One of the things that we started out with was feeling safe, and how you explained the brain, and how do you get into a change management effort and you don't know where the people are all coming from. What are their threats? What was their life like? What was, their inherent makeup from their brain? So I think that's one of the things that's difficult to increase the sense of predictability when you're doing a project.
Were there any specific actions in talking about that you thought you could take to address that?
Communicate, communicate, communicate.
Well, yeah. Those are always good. Yeah.
We did talk about making people feel comfortable. If it's confidential, then it should be confidential.
Yeah, the trust factor is huge, just in terms of if people are laying out a situation where you're being told that the ramifications will be positive, that really is true.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, not all change. I've seen too much of that, like try and spin a good story for something that's not going to work, but it's going to be impactful for people. And we do always try and put some positive in it, but as important, it's important to talk about what's not changing, because often a lot of times people catastrophize things and think everything's going to change. And just as important it is to talk about what's staying the same.
Good point.
To give
Trish,
people comfort level. Yes.
I'd like to give you an example. So
Yeah.
we worked on some strategic initiatives that for my company is really not something that we do, but it was for a food and beverage group. And the first meeting, we had consultants facilitate it. And the first meeting was everyone here is the same level. Everyone here has a vested interest, blah, 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 blah. So I said something that really pissed off the senior vice president, and he didn't talk to me for 2 years.
Oh, boy.
So now I don't talk at the meetings.
Oh, wow.
That was a perfect example of failure.
Yeah. Well, you said something that triggered them for sure.
Absolutely.
Any other tactical, things that any of you guys talked about in either of your groups?
Well, one thing that I have just experienced recently, as I was mentioning in the group, is that there's some time built in, because everything is going to be changing just personally for me because I'm new. I know we're talking about organizational change, but time and permission to learn and to grow and to maybe acknowledge you don't know everything, but it's built in so that you, as a toddler, even though you're a skilled professional and you're new, and if there's going to be a change, you're going to be plopping down and, not knowing everything. So I think that that's something maybe strategically could be built in.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Oftentimes when I go in and start working with clients, and we have been putting ideas together on paper and strategizing for 12 to 18 months or whatever, and then they go to roll it out. And the leaders don't understand, well, why aren't they just why is there so much resistance and all this? And I have to remind them, you've been living with these ideas for a good year to 15 months already. This is brand new information for these folks. So time does have to be built in to allow people to explore, make meaning of it for themselves. What does this mean for me? Have conversations with their leaders. all of those things that you just mentioned, Jenny. Because when they go to roll it out, guess what? They're on to the next thing. I mean, that's what their role is as leaders, is, vision and moving the company forward. But they have to be reminded you're simultaneously managing these things, and you can't just throw something over the wall and expect it to be adopted all the way. And well, let me share with you some of my ideas. And again, these are things that you probably have done or seen done. Some of it won't, a lot of it's probably not rocket science, but like I said, connecting it to how it's addressing the brain needs is what the key learning is here and why it's so important. So we talked about information and communication. The more information and communication that you can have, information is power. And again, the brain doesn't like anything that it can't make meaning of. So getting people involved in co-creating that change, like Shani mentioned, people need to make meaning of things, gain their own insights, have it work for them. So organizations need to understand that the energy the employees will expend because they don't know will be significant. And when there's a lack of information, as you know, people fill in information that could be wrong because they're trying to make connections, they're trying to make meaning, they're trying to create predictability. So that regular cadence of communications, many different vehicles we use, websites we use, sponsored networks we use, regular communications, we have videos, help desks, all those kinds of things. I don't know about you, but many of the times what I hear is, okay, we're implementing this change. We'll just do a couple of communications and we've done change management. Have you seen that done in your organization? Sandy's furiously shaking her head yes. And I just cringe. It's like, oh my God, change management is not about a set of communications. That's just one piece of it. So, all right, the second hack I think of is those short-term goals. So this gets back to what I was talking about with the performance, how important it is to give people something that they feel they are accomplishing. So look at those, encourage your leaders to be looking at those goals that are accomplishable, particularly right now when people are feeling so burned out and overloaded with work, and many probably don't even know where to start. Just find something small, accomplishable, and then praise them and recognize the heck out of them, because all of that increases that dopamine. Help people to really plan their work days so that they feel they have more control throughout the day, and allows for innovation and creativity. So giving people short-term goals is important. Focusing on building those relationships. Remember, I said the brain is very social. So there's a tendency during change for people to pay less attention to the relationships and more attention to the methods and processes, as I mentioned. But that is when it's even more important to do, is pay attention. This is when it matters the most. So creating sense of connection is not a nice to have. It's really something the brain requires. It gets lonely, it feels rejected, people feel isolated without the connectivity. So creating opportunities for people to connect, whether it's happy hours or team meetings or whatever those senses of connections do. Something I'm going to share with you at the end. You're all welcome to join, but one of the things my firm decided to do this year was to have monthly virtual networking connections, and we just meet for once a month for an hour, and it's nothing but just networking. And I have had more people just say join the meetings because they needed a brain break during their work day. So it's been really it's been great for me to keep in touch with people that I know, but also they're meeting each other. And I think that's just filling a need that people are hungry right now for connection. Celebrating those achievements. So finding ways to do, you know, spot rewards or have little celebratory parties or whatever, reminding people of what their achievements have been, because it really allows them to be thinking about what they have accomplished. Again, getting those dopamine levels back in play and telling those stories of success. So you have success stories along the way. There's an organization here near where I live in the Valley Forge area that I don't know if they're still doing it because they might have grown, but every Friday they had a town hall at lunch, and it was just about sharing what had happened, success stories for the week, and people were highlighted, and it really built this culture. Even though they were not physically together, it built this real culture and energized them to keep on going. So very important. Laughter, creating times where people can just have fun together. And back off of being so intense. Again, feeding that social connection need, feeding that time for people to feel at least something's a little bit more certain. And yes, right, good, focusing on day-to-day successes. Thanks, Jenny. Yep. One research study shows from the Warwick University and Oswald 2009, showing that making people happy increased productivity by 12%. And this is either making people happy, like either making somebody laugh, or watching a comedy show, or even eating chocolate. So I say, let's give away chocolate. Mindset, we're hearing so much right now about mindfulness. One of the things we know about the brain now is that it used to be considered that the brain stopped developing at around 20 years of age. But we know with neuroplasticity and everything we're learning about the brain, it still can grow and change. And giving people workshops on how to manage their mindsets and opportunities for mindfulness and those kinds of things, teaching people about neuroplasticity and the fact that their brain can still work and still grow. You know, there's significant implications of this when we talk about those that are learning and developing, you know, using their monies for tuition and all of that. It's really important for people to develop those skills and develop in those you know, into emotionally intelligent areas, as well as helping people understand the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So we can teach an old dog new tricks. Having things that are fairly new, like it really helps stimulate to keep the brain to keep people motivated. So even like trying a new meeting space out, or using a different kind of agenda, or, you know, having a new person lead, or having a different leadership in a meeting, or whatever, what do you call it, rotating facilitators or whatever, just something new creates something, creates opportunities for people to explore and get excited, which is really what we're trying to do. These long periods of change, which we're all in now constantly, like I mentioned, the VUCA, these are all things that people need to start really intentionally introducing into their work environments in order to keep motivation going. And then I talked about praise and recognition, and finally, self-reflection. So what we touched on a little bit tonight was about the need for people to really sit back and look at their own triggers, understand what may have occurred in their life that is impacting how they behave in organizations today, how they're leading, and particularly getting during times of change, how it gets triggered. So important. And so this is, again, a lot what we do with leaders in our executive coaching, we're coming at it from a change perspective, but we really get into a lot of conversations about, tell me about, what went on for you in your life. Again, not to be therapists, but to help them understand themselves a little bit better, be a little bit more aware of what the stuff is that they're doing that could be sabotaging those trusting relationships. So those are just a few of the hacks. Again, I don't think you've probably seen anything new. Did anything else occur to people while you were listening? I'm just looking here at some of the chat messages. Yeah, different ways. Good. Any other thoughts?
I think that whole point that you made earlier, and I think maybe Tracy mentioned it too, but being able to separate out what is the brain's automatic reaction and what is all the other stuff, it seems to me a very powerful tool for being able to, initiate this kind of change, without it having sort of baggage attached to it from whoever's trying to create the change strategy.
Yeah. It really removes the emotions and helps leaders particularly understand, they're not personally resisting you, leaders. What's the best way to deal with many hacks happening at the same time? Do you want to say a little bit more about that, Patty? What you mean? Like you can be implementing a lot of hacks at the same time, but I may not understand your question.
Well, the things that you would have information and you can have short-term goals, right? At the same time,
Yeah.
you could be having relationships and you going and talking about praise and recognition, right? So
Right. So are you saying, I think there's a question that I'm not understanding here.
So I would consider those to be multiple hacks, except one could be positive and one could be negative. Like, let's say the short-term goals that you were talking about went against the information that you were either talking about or getting or giving out. Wouldn't they be contradictory to each other?
Oh, well, the goals that I was referring to are some kind of a small task or whatever that you and your leader would agree to for you to get done.
Okay.
And then because you're able to get that done, you're feeling a sense of accomplishment.
Okay, and I was looking at this from a perspective of leading change in a group of people.
Okay.
Like,
So you still, as a leader, you're, if I'm understanding correctly, you're still helping all of those people to look at what their goals are, and as they accomplish it, you're praising them, you're giving recognition, you're having team meetings or whatever.
right.
You're meeting with them on a regular basis. It's even more important to be in closer relationship with people. So yeah, you will be, leadership is not for the faint of heart. I mean, there's a lot of balls you have to juggle, but.
Is there one that you think is not more important, but could go wrong more than others?
I'm just looking here, could go more wrong.
Like if I don't give praise, and recognition, is that worse than me not self-reflecting or to kind of prioritize?
No, I would say I actually, when you put it that way, I think a leader that is not self-reflecting and really taking inventory consistently and dealing with their own crap is probably the worst thing that you can do.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm conscious of time. One thing that I did promise to you as part of the objectives was to talk about how what we talked about maps to the competencies that you're building on the capability model. So if you look at the different, and I know it might be a little bit of an eye chart here, but if you look at the different competencies under which is on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see where some of these hacks are really, if you're implementing them, you are really building those capabilities. So if you're doing really good communications, you know, you're building that communication capability. If you're really doing your self-reflection as a leader, you're working in this emotional intelligence space and developing that capability. So given what I just kind of processed through, are there others that stand out for you here on this model about what we've talked about with the hacks?
Well, like the organizational development and culture, bringing people together in networking and creating situations where people can really work with each other and off each other and include the humor.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many prongs here. You know, org development, yes. In some degree, you're consulting, even if you're an internal employee, and you're as a talent development professional, you're consulting constantly in your organization to these. Obviously, change management, future readiness, career and leadership development coaching. I mean, there's a lot of different places where doing these hacks and keeping this neuroscience stuff in forefront of your mind, you are you're actually building some of these competencies. So I think it's important, at least for me, when I'm working in a role, I need the practicality of it. And for me, this is where the practicality, not only what I shared, but also where you're practically, you can say, I'm building competencies in these different areas when I talk about my talent development role. So that's really what I wanted to share with you tonight. I'll turn it back to Jenny at this point. Thank you so much for all of the conversation. I hope that you found this information helpful. And again, let me just quickly share with you these resources that I mentioned. So you can go on to my website at transformstrat.com. There is a podcast that I did about this silent stakeholder. That you can catch off of the on the web. We do a learning lab series kind of on a quarterly basis. It's very different times, but we have one coming up in June on Thursday, and we're going to be talking about how to create empathetic workplaces. We're hearing a lot about the need for empathy in organizations today. There's a lot of stuff on the conversations and discussion threads and everything. But the question is, do people really know how to do this? So we're going to be talking about what does that look like? What are the conditions to create empathetic workplaces? And how do we know what the boundaries are? You know, sometimes being empathetic can go too far and those kind of things. So that should be an interesting learning lab discussion. A colleague of mine who's an executive coach and a former psychotherapist will be working with us on that. And then again, you're welcome. And by the way, if you want to come to the Learning Lab, just drop me a note. Happy to have you. I'll put you on the list. And then the virtual networking meetings, if you want to join that, there's, you know, again, there's no agenda. It's just meeting new people and talking and learning about other people. So you're welcome to get added to that list. So thank you so much again for coming tonight. And again, I hope this was helpful for you. So
Thank you, Trish.
Yeah, thank you, Tricia.
Thank
This was
you.
terrific, really.